Welcome to another episode of Global Voices from Ozone API. I'm Huw Davies, one of the co-founders and CEO, and today I'm delighted to be joined by one of our own, Andy. Andy's product manager within the team. But Andy, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Andy Woollatt. I've been with Ozone for 6 months now. Came in to look after the standards across the world, and we're here to talk about version 4 of open banking in the UK.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess just to set the scene a little bit, open banking has been live in the UK for a number of years now. In the early stages, as the CMA order was being delivered, we had multiple different new versions adding new functionality and capabilities. But I guess with the hiatus following the completion of the CMA order and trying to define the transition and the future stages, actually not much has happened on the standards front for a period of time. But just this week, we've had version 4 published,
Yes.
which it's quite a significant change. So, Andy, maybe if we go back to the first question of why are we seeing a new version of the standards at this stage?
That's a very good sort of question, an in-depth question. So version 4 has been very much driven by external requirements. One of the first ones is that the security profile, which the UK Open Banking has been built on, was FAPI 02. The OpenID are deprecating that from the end of this year. So there is a requirement under the RTS that we or all banks comply with or follow the standardisation of their interfaces, follow the standardisation of communications issued by international or European organisations. So that would mean following a deprecated FAPI version would make it non-compliant. So the OBL took the decision with the members of the CMA 9 to move to FAPI 10 Advanced. And that needs to be in place by the end of this year in order to migrate over to FAPI 10 Advanced and allow 02 to deprecate. There have also been a number of external factors around CHAPS payments for Bank of England. So by May 2025, they are introducing ISO 20022 codes and require additional risk information to be provided for CHAPS payments, in particular for payments regarding property transfers or payments relating to properties. So this new version, whilst it's not giving any what I would class sexy functionality or new functionality, is really core to make sure that the UK ecosystem continues to be in line with the rest of the activities which are happening in the wider world, not just in the UK, but FAPI getting rid of 0.2, but also making sure that complying with the Bank of England requirements, and also international payments which are moving to ISO 20022 as well.
So two big drivers, one being the security profile that the UK open banking standards have been built on,
yes.
An early version of FAPI. Mm-hmm. That version's being deprecated, so they need to migrate to one that continues to be supported, and the alignment with the ISO 20022 data standards and data structures. So two fairly fundamental pieces of the standard. Maybe if we focus on the security piece for a moment and get into the weeds a little bit more, and what are the changes in the new standard? We've talked about why, but what are the changes? So you talked about, so the UK was previously on version 0.2 of FAPI, the implementer's draft, and then moving to FAPI 1 Advanced. So what's the difference and what does that mean?
Really, the first fundamental bit is probably in the name that it was an implementer's draft. So it was always intended to be, this is the first version for, which has been driven by open banking anyway, and that moves, it was their initial draft. It's been out in the world 2016, 17, it's now moved on. And obviously with that, they needed to shut that down and get out and start moving on to FAPI 1.0. Bearing in mind as well, we're also, in the draft stages of FAPI 2, so it's playing catch up a bit. Fundamentally, there's probably not that much of a change of the way FAPI 1 Advanced has been implemented in the UK. There are a number of changes around parameters and claims which need to be mandated, but it works along the same line. What FAPI 1.0 Advanced gives you is a wider opportunity to enhance and utilise elements like push authorisation requests, introducing Pixie around security side, which haven't been or decided to be adopted by UB.
Yeah, so some of those elements have actually been stripped out from the standard, is that correct?
It is, yeah. So there was a decision made not to go, so there was a number of options put on the table, and a decision was made not to venture down to start utilising PAR. I think mainly, the view was that that was quite a big fundamental change as well. You're basically removing the existing sort of consent staging all those individual endpoints and removing it with one. It's still, probably a personal view, opportunity missed, because PAR is, is used around the world. Australian standards based on PAR, FDX, PAR, where we're working in the Latin regions, PAR. Yeah. So it's sort of still a one step up outside.
That was going to be my next question, actually. Does this feel like an interim step, given FAPI 2 is coming out, a number of global open banking standards are now being based around FAPI 2 and more advanced version. Is this a missed opportunity? Is it an interim step? And I mean, as you know, we're working with banks all around the world, and we support all of the different FAPI profiles. So we've implemented all of them. The version that's included in the open banking standard version 4 isn't yet the most modern version. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I can see why the decision was made, given the CMA 9 have a timeline of by the end of this year to implement it.
Yeah.
It obviously got published, obviously consultation's been going on, but the final publication, end of June, they've now got 6 months. In reality, they've got 3 months to get their sandbox up to date, to give the two PPs a 90-day window of being able to test, ready for it to go live. So the deadline is there. Probably moving to PAR and using all the additional extensions and security improvements, probably in that timeline was a step too far. So probably back to the original question, yes, one hopefully can see it as a stepping stone for the future, particularly as well when you start going into more wider data sharing and service initiation.
Yeah.
And moving away then from sort of bespoke consent staging we've currently got to then moving it into more industry standard approach.
Yeah, I agree. It does feel, whilst it's not clear, it does feel like this is a stepping stone along the journey to continue to enhance the security profile. And then the other piece we talked about was the change to the data structure to align with ISO 20022. And I guess you touched a little bit there on milestones. It'd be good to understand, so what does this mean for the different players in the ecosystem? Maybe if we start with the CMA9 banks, what are the requirements on them?
So the CMA9, there's two sort of sets of requirements, and the FAPI element and version 4, although sort of hand in hand, are slightly decoupled. So the FAPI deadline, or FAPI 02, gets depreciated at the end of this year. So there is a requirement to migrate and adopt FAPI 10 Advanced by the 31st of December this year. Under the RTS requirements, you have to give TPPs 90 days advance, so your sandbox needs to be ready. So a CMA9 sandbox has to have the FAPI 1 in place by the 30th of September, assuming they're pushing it right to the end of the 31st of December. Obviously, if they're going early, the sandbox moves early as well. The version 4 changes need to be implemented by the CMA9 by the 31st of March next year. So there's another sort of gap there. But again, because those changes require 90 days, those changes in the sandbox, in the CMA9 sandbox, need to be ready by the 31st of December, assuming they're going live right at the end. Obviously, if they're moving it forward, that time moves forward as well. So it's those changes not only need to be ready for production, but also need to be available in each of those sandboxes so that the TPPs can test their new their solution to start receiving the different version 4 payloads or response payloads, because it's not only we talked about the ISO 20022, but there's a lot of also additional objects which have been added, which extends the response payload. So it gives a richer information to the TPPs and also then initiating payments. So they move to things like including ultimate creditor, ultimate debtor, a legal entity identifier, all again associated to the chance requirements.
So there's more valuable and rich data within the payments payload as part of the new standards.
Yes, and also to help counteract fraud.
So
it's not just a case of, I'm swapping a long name for a 4-digit code. With that as well, there are the opportunity from the TPP side to provide additional information, and also if it's held on the bank side, additional information back with that payment.
Okay, so for the CMA9, they've got 2 deadlines to hit and probably some pretty heavy lifting to do.
Yes.
I mean, we know we're implementing this as part of the official sandbox for open banking in the UK. So we've done the work, we know. What about the other banks in the UK then? What do you think are some of the implications and considerations for the other banks?
And that's where it becomes very interesting and hopefully not controversial, a bit grey. Because because this has been driven by the CMA, and it's been a CMA directive down, it only covers the CMA9.
But you mentioned earlier, one thing that was really interesting, you mentioned that PSD2 and the PSR states that should be based on an internationally recognised standard, and the old version is being deprecated, so will no longer be an internationally recognised standard. Is there a PSD2 compliance consideration here?
There is, and that's where it starts to get, I would say, that grey, or you can look at it black and white and say, well, that's what it says in the standards, that's no longer there, but that's where...
I guess it'll depend on the FCA's view and position on this.
And each of those non-CMA9s, compliance department, whether they believe their interface continues to comply with Article 30, Section 3. Are we comfortable? Now, there is possibly a good chance, I'm not speaking, I've got no insider knowledge or anything like that, but the FCA may go, well, actually, you need to, even though you're not a CMA, you need to move to FAPI 1.0 because that is the true industry or the baseline standard which needs to be implemented. So
there could be a PSD2 compliance angle, but
yes.
I guess so. A lot of the banks are outside of the CMA9. Probably fair to assume a lot of the banks are on much earlier versions of the open banking standard. Are there benefits to moving to version 4?
There certainly are. So not only, I would say most of the desire, the non-CMA 9 probably are adopting or sitting and probably around 3.1.2, which was the standard which got implemented by the old open banking implementation entity to comply with PSD2.
Yep. There
was no requirement or need for any of the non-CMA 9 to continue to move through those versions.
Yes.
So it was down to each individual preference whether they moved along. If they haven't moved along, then they're probably not taking advantage of new functionality or offering new functionality, particularly around VRPs, variable recurring payments. Again, only the CMA 9 were mandated and required to provide that, and a limited form of VRP sweeping between accounts owned by the same customer.
But we are seeing some of the banks commercialize non-sweeping variable recurring payment use cases such as e-commerce and recurring bill payment, aren't we? And that's an opportunity that most banks are missing out on at the moment.
That's an opportunity, and also the direction of travel. Yeah. So Open Banking Limited are will be running a commercial VRP pilot, so it's probably not if, but when that comes into place. So it's if there's no direction or push down, you could be, rather than being maybe in regulatory led, this could be an opportunity to be more, I say, market led or individual led, to look to take advantage of the opportunities which are available through open banking, which as a financial institution you may not be taking advantage of.
So no, I agree. I think there are a few reasons why this is interesting to consider for the non-CMA 9 banks. As you say, one is it's upgrading the security profile to something that is aligned to a supported international standard. That sounds like a good thing, but there's potentially the PSD2 regulatory side of it as well. A move to a more modern version of the open banking standards unlocks capabilities like variable recurring payments, as you say, and we are seeing VRP volumes increase. We're seeing banks like NatWest start to drive much more of a commercial marketplace. So there's a real revenue opportunity. But you also mentioned the richer payment payload and the fact that that can be a helpful tool when it comes to fighting fraud, as well as aligning with the FCA requirements around things like CHAPS payments.
Yeah, and we've also got, I haven't mentioned it yet, but it's an important element around the JROC, Weststream 4, the information flows, and one of them is looking at updating or providing a richer information around payment status error messages. So that's work is ongoing at the moment. Again, depends on whether it's been mandatory or on just a small element of the ecosystem or the wider. And I think this is where also as part of the JROC work, the sort of future entity, the levelling up, where does that go? And then the future direction once the CMA order ends, and in effect, you no longer have the CMA 9, obviously that will still exist, but that sort of label or inclusive club, where they want it to be an inclusive club for that, to actually then suddenly say, oh, now this is the UK ecosystem, you have to adopt it as a whole, not just well, you're one of these, you have to.
So whilst that's not certain, I think there is an element of future-proofing here.
I think getting above, in front of this.
Yes.
Because, again, we haven't touched, there's a lot going on, like smart data as well. So we know whatever sort of happens tomorrow, and obviously if people watching it, it may have happened already, so no plot spoiler, but it's likely we're going to get a different government, but whether we get a different...
You heard it here first.
Yeah. But even, the Labour had certainly more in their manifesto, a few more lines than Conservatives, so it's not going to go away. So, and if we want to, as a UK, continue to be the market leaders with this, we need to probably make sure then that it's not a small subset, and appreciate volume-wise, customer-wise there, but from a banking institution, that you haven't got 9 organisations on a version 4 and the rest of the larger organisations on a different subset, which then starts to make the TPP's life a lot harder.
Well, I guess the final place I wanted to go was exactly there. So at the moment, I mean, we're going to be supporting a sandbox in line with the old version and a sandbox in line with version 4 for the market, because they are quite different. What does this mean for the many TPPs? What impact will this have on them?
So the TPPs will now have to, because there's, to me, definitely 2 different paths here. So the TPPs will need to understand from the institution they are calling, are they on FAPI 1.0 or not? And we'll need to tailor that call appropriately. And because FAPI 1.0 needs particular additional claims and claim values, and if you don't provide those, your request will be rejected.
Right, okay.
So it's similarly it could be, I sent it through, I'm getting rejected. Plus also, as mentioned, you can get different payloads back if they've got the information, or you'll be sending different information. So it's suddenly, not only different, but potentially additional information in version 4, but you're also potentially will be getting the ISO codes back. So now, you make exactly the same call, albeit version 3, version 4, to the same endpoint name. One will provide you back maybe a smaller payload with the longer names. Another one from the CMA9 will potentially provide you a bigger payload back with ISO codes. So then you've then got
So we're definitely going to have a 2-tier market here, and it's. I mean, it goes without saying that the largest volume of usage comes from the CMA9 banks, but the TPPs are going to have to deal with this world where they have this 2-tier market. They'll need to understand what standard is the bank supporting, and manage that in the right way. But then they'll also have to deal with the difference in payload that's coming back.
Yeah, and as a customer, the average customer out there doesn't really care whether it's a CMA9.
Correct.
Doesn't really, I want to continue. If suddenly then you go, thanks very much, but for bank A, B, C, and D, I can no longer aggregate your accounts or can't initiate payments, it's going to be the TPPs who are losing those business and their services. So they maybe have to work some magic, invest some time, or reduce a service, which isn't probably a place the UK ecosystem wants to get into.
So I guess, I mean, this is, as we said at the beginning, this is a big change. So the new standard is a significant change driven by 2 complex areas. One is the upgrade of the security profile. The other is the alignment with ISO 222. As we said, that's going to be mandated for the 9 largest banks, but there's an opportunity for the rest to, I guess, future-proof, move to the latest security profile and to a standard with richer payloads for the payment data and more capabilities such as VRP. But there's going to be this interim period where life gets a bit trickier for the TPPs who are dealing with this. I mean, we're setting ourselves up to help the ecosystem through this, and and help banks make that transition easily so that they can upgrade to the latest version without significant cost and complexity. But I guess one final question, more of a crystal ball one, and I know I'm dropping this on you. So version 4 is coming now. We talked about why. What do you think's next?
What do I think, or what do I want?
Let's go with what would you want next?
What I would want is that the labelling around CMA9 disappears, and that as a ecosystem, everyone has to come into line. So it's a fair, level playing field for everyone. And more really from a customer point of view, that to be able to have that functionality, the same functionality, whatever banking institution I'm with. And that, the additional functionality. So, if I'm with a non-CMA9 who haven't adopted the latest standards and are offering my sweeping, do I go with someone else?
Yeah.
Or, do I take advantage? So to have that, I think, that common across the board set of standards, very much like they've done in Australia, where everyone has to be on the same.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I was going to say, I totally agree with that wish. I think we've seen this in other markets where there is a single standard implemented consistently across the ecosystem with a strong regime of conformance and certification. It isn't a surprise, but the ecosystem takes off more quickly and is a higher quality. So, as a finishing note, Andy, I would completely agree with that. So thank you. I know this is a complex topic and we went pretty deep, but this is a view from the product team at Ozone API. So a huge thank you, Andy. This has been a really interesting conversation.
Thank you. We can talk about this for a lot longer.